Good afternoon and welcome. As you're being seated, it's an opportunity to think about Pi Day, which is not the dessert, but as you know, the mathematical symbol pi, this is Pi Day 314 or 314159, however the rest of it goes. But I wanted to take just a second to acknowledge the death of Stephen Hawking. And I'm sure many, if not all of you, saw that in the news this morning. A terrible loss, an extraordinary person who I was privileged to hear speak at GW several years ago, and just riveting in so many ways. Now, you may know that we commission national and sometimes state-based public opinion surveys on a regular basis and have been doing so for decades. And we have a question that asks the respondents if they are able to give us the name of a living scientist. And we've asked that question for, I think, 20 years. And the number one person mentioned year after year after year was Stephen Hawking. And I imagine that he will continue to be mentioned because he's made that much of a difference in the lives of so many people. We have an opportunity today in this meeting to hear from other people who are today making a difference in all our lives. And to introduce our keynote speaker, I want to welcome to the stage fellow board member, former member of Congress, Bart Gordon of Tennessee.
Hello, everyone, and welcome today. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce to you today Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson, the ranking member, soon to be chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Eddie Bernice, did you like that introduction? I thought you would. Eddie Bernice, and I'm pleased to report, was overwhelmingly reelected to the primary, last week in Texas, 30th District. I had the good fortune to serve with Eddie Bernice for several years on the Science Committee. There are lots of accolades that I could give to you for what she did there, but I think that what she will always be known for, more than anything else, is being champion for STEM education, particularly advancing women and minorities into STEM fields. Every opportunity there was to do something in that area, Eddie Bernice was right there helping. She also, notably, since Mary, you brought it up, she was a co-sponsor of a resolution that I had a few years ago that designated this as Pi Day. So I will also extend to you happy Pi Day. And maybe more relevant to today's meeting, Representative Johnson has received numerous awards during her time in office and regularly participated in a variety of caucuses, the Mental Health Caucus, the Biomedical Research Caucus, the House Diabetes Caucus, as well as receiving the 2017 Legislator of the Year Award for the Mental Health of America for fighting for solutions and resources to help those with mental illness. She also had this quirky idea that facts and science should play a role in making governmental decisions. And maybe that will once again become vogue. So Representative Johnson, thank you for being here and welcome.
Good afternoon, early afternoon. Let me thank Chairman Gordon for that introduction, and I was really recalling our experience when he was chair of the Science Committee. We now call it Science, Space, and Technology. It's had several names, as you know, but that's when we were able to get America Competes passed. It really was a productive time, and we really appreciated his leadership. We needed all the attention that we could get in the committee, when he became chair. So we miss you. We miss having the opportunity of being chair, too. I want to thank Mary Woodley and Research America for inviting me to speak this afternoon. It'll be short because I'm going to run, but I want to express my appreciation for you. And I saw the pamphlet that says Advocacy, what is this? Advocacy Works. We need all the advocacy we can get, and it does work. And I think that this group has helped to save us some in terms of not being really written off under the current leadership. Because unfortunately, funding for science has really fallen victim to both our larger budget battles and ideology. We are still trying to stand up for science, sound science, and I know you've heard the arguments. But we have a particular problem with the administration this time because they're proposing $3.2 billion decrease in the non-defense R&D budget. I was able to work with a couple of the Republicans as we put out, had to have Democrats the last time to pass the bill for the government to remain open. So we were able to negotiate some research and development money in that budget. Although we are facing that same dilemma next week, and I hope we don't look up and find that it's disappeared. But we are very concerned because we don't believe that the administration really understands the importance of sound science and research. So we have to push, and advocacy does work. And you are considered our advocacy community. We're really falling far short of nurturing our own homegrown STEM talent because many of the agencies we depended on to be an inspiration to our youth and stimulate the interest, like the education component of the NASA budget, and many of the other activities that now have been cut. We especially need to encourage and continue to encourage our minorities, boys and girls, but I especially try to focus on getting our girls involved as well. Every day we see the need to have this talent. Being from Dallas, Texas, where we use more H-1B visas in Silicon Valley, we know how important it is to continue to stimulate young people, and our growth in this country really rests with a lot of the minority growth. So I hope you'll continue to encourage that as well. Being the home of Texas Instruments, we have gotten a great deal of support from Texas Instruments, and I simply thank them and say, this is an investment in your future. But we really have to keep this soundboard going throughout the country because I am very concerned about our competitiveness as a nation. As we are cutting research money, other countries are improving their budgets. I don't want us to lose our leadership, and the only way we can keep it is to first provide the talent, and secondly, make big advocacy for the funding. We still are the United States, and we still can advocate. I'm really proud of the work that we have done in my entire career in science. We've just hit some bumpy roads. But next year, no matter who's in the majority, the leadership on the Republican side of the committee will change. And I hope it'll change for the better. I consider myself a friend to Lamar Smith, but he has not led very constructively, as I tell him almost every day. I just left him a few minutes ago. I left him a few minutes ago and I said, I'm going to talk about you. And so he said, "What are you going to say? Something good?" I said, "How could I make up anything? I'm going to tell the truth." So, but that's the kind of relationship we have. But I still need a lot of support in encouraging him because he'll be there the rest of the year. I really am proud of the work that we've been able to achieve since I've been on this committee for 25 years. And I have had some feelings of helplessness the last few years, but let's just hope that we're looking for a brighter future. I said this really to the present president the little time I had to speak to him once, that really science and technology research is the door to the future. You cannot have a future in any country unless you're looking toward the future, and you can't substantiate it without research and development. So I'm hoping that that is understood. Although I haven't seen the results of it yet, I still know that I believe strongly that it's the truth. I know this group is also interested in mental health. That is a field of which I had been active prior to coming to Congress, and I see the really grave need we have for more attention to mental health in this country. We were able to pass just a little part of what we were contemplating. It got into the research budget for NIH, the 21st Century Research Bill, which was very watered down, but it was better than what we had, and we continue to work on it. I'm going to miss Congressman Murphy, but he assures me that he would be available to help. But we do need to continue in that direction. Each time we see massive incidents, we get concerned about it again. But without those massive incidents, we still have the problem and don't want it to be manifested in that fashion before we give it attention. We hope that we can continue to improve the kind of grant money that's available. The one specific provision sets up a $5 million grant program to provide assertive community treatment, which is one of the most successful strategies, I think, for helping across the country. I'm from Dallas, Texas, where we have our real big share of people with mental illness and very little approaches to deal with it. But in visiting with my governor recently, he assures me that that's going to change. And being from Texas, I hope that's the truth. I feel kind of locked in right now in this position, coming from Texas, that is not known for a lot of its progressive leadership in office, and coming here and finding the same kind of thing right now makes it a little difficult to be optimistic. But I refuse not to be, and I would say to you, continue to be optimistic, continue to advocate, because I still believe that this is the most important area for the future of this country, for our research and development, and preparing our young people to carry on. So it might not be sexy in every audience, but it pays off when you have adequate investment. All of the achievements we've made, when you look at the background, has come from first the research and then the development. And so I hope that you will continue to advocate and push and educate and inspire our young people. I told the acting administrator of NASA just last week, when he called to say he was going to be leaving, that we both spoke of how disappointed we are that the education component had been struck again in the NASA budget. But he said, we'll find some way to do it. Well, I can tell you that young people are always fascinated with those areas that they have not been able to tinker with and to take control of, and that is space. And so it's very important that we continue to inspire our young people, excite them into science, because we know one thing about it. They're not going to make as much money as hip-hop, basketball, or football, But I tell them all the time, you can change the world. And you can influence the world through your great deeds when you take the time to do that. And believe me, the satisfaction will be just as great as going into something where you'll have to retire before you're 40. So I hope that we'll continue to spread that message. I applaud you for staying together and for what you do and your leadership, and I want you to continue. Thank you very much.
Well, Ranking Member Johnson has always been a hard act to follow, and today will be no exception to that, obviously. And we thank you, Eddie, very much for taking the time from your busy schedule. We know how busy it is. We know you got to run to share your insights with us. On to official business for a little bit, if we can. I call to order Research America's annual meeting of members. Through proxies submitted electronically and attendance here today, I confirm that for purposes of business conducted at this annual meeting, quorum requirements are met. 2017 was an important year for Research for Health, for science writ large, and for our nation. In the fiscal year 17 appropriations omnibus, Congress appropriated an additional $2 billion in funding for the National Institutes of Health and congressional champions for research, including Labor HHS Appropriations Subcommittee chairs, Senators Roy Blunt, Representative Tom Cole, among others, are determined to maintain an upward trajectory in funding. Also in 2017, due in part to advocacy by those in this room, and we thank you all, Congress reauthorized several FDA user fee programs in time, thankfully, to prevent layoff notices or rifts. Further, the excise tax on medical devices was suspended for 2 years. The ultimate goal is repeal, but another suspension is a good step forward toward that goal. Research America and partners launched a Raise the Caps effort to complement the campaigns from NDD United and others. The initiative had stellar support. Ultimately, the CAPS deal that was included in a February 9th continuing resolution contained a much-needed increase for our nation's priorities. We at Research America and all of us here today must and will continue to advocate for the health and research funding at NIH, CDC, FDA, and AHRQ, and NSF, as well as our nation's other science and public health agencies, so that the promise of health, prosperity, and security can be realized. But that is certainly not the whole picture. Private sector innovation gets us across the goal line to faster medical progress, and we must continue to ensure it thrives in this country. Our alliance members inspire us, guide us, and explain to a large degree the successes we had last year. And let me just say thank you for that. It is now my pleasure to introduce John Porter, Research America Chair Emeritus and Chair of the Nominating Committee, to share the Nominating Committee report and hold the election of new directors. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the Nominating Committee, I am pleased to present the following slate of directors to serve on Research America's Board of Directors. Nominations for re-election of directors to a 3-year term are as follows: Susan Dentzer, Dr. Jay Gershon, Elizabeth Baker Kepfer, Deborah Lappin, Dr. Alan Leshner, Dr. Hal Paz, Gary Reed, Dr. Keith Yamamoto, and Dr. Elias Zerhouni. And we are pleased to put forth nominations for election of 2 new directors to serve a 3-year term, and those are Dr. Guillermo Willie Prado. Now, I found out that Guillermo, the English equivalent is William, and that's why he likes to be called Willie. So if you meet him, call him Willie. And Derek Rapp. Mr. Chairman, I move the approval of the slate of directors as presented.
May I just point out that you didn't read Lucinda Main's name in the previous slide? Just for the
I'm sorry, Dr. Lucinda Main is, I apologize for that, is also part of the slate, and her name is up there. So now I move the adoption of the slate of Board of Directors. Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'll take the vote, I guess. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. And they are adopted. Thank you very much.
All this on the Board of Research America, and I think most of the people in this room know that the real heart and soul of Research America is not the board or whatever. It is our president, Mary Woolley, who's been such a tremendous advocate in this whole area that we're talking about here today, and she will give us a report now. Mary?
Thank you, Jen. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all of the board. Thank you for the continuing opportunity to serve and to be among so many of our members and partners. It's really great to be able to reflect back on what we all accomplished together in the past year and have some reflections about today and the year ahead. So assuming we can make this work. What am I doing? There we go. So together, and it really was an alliance effort, all the things that Mike Castle mentioned and that are highlighted here took an enormous amount of work. But they illustrated, just as Congresswoman Johnson said, that advocacy does work. It makes a difference. And look what we were able to accomplish in assuring an increase, a significant increase in NIH funding, and helping out in supporting user fees, crucial user fees for the FDA, putting a cap on the movement to reduce indirect cost recovery, protecting ARC funding, protecting the Fogarty Center at NIH, which was at one point slated to be eliminated, assuring the continuation of DoD-funded research, preserving the R&D tax credit, and keeping away the excise tax on medical devices. Our members and our partners also empowered us directly through your support to accomplish an amazing amount of effort in the media and through our advocacy campaign, the Raise the Caps campaign, really make a difference, drive the elimination, at least for now, of those deadly budget caps. We also spent quite a lot of time, not I personally, but my talented colleagues and many of our board members, on Capitol Hill, making the case directly and both educating and advocating in our efforts there. We sent out lots of alerts, and you all among our membership responded to those so that there really could be an impact on Capitol Hill. We conducted a number of congressional briefings on the Hill. These are some of the topics that we covered, and we're very open to hearing your ideas for topics to focus in on in the year ahead. We had a very timely and high content conversation in West Virginia. We were delighted to have the sponsorship there. The hosting duties and networking were wonderfully accomplished by our board member, Dr. Mary Hendricks, who is the president of Shepherd University and was able to attract both senators from West Virginia to a quite inspiring and, as I said, high content forum in which quite a bit of the conversation was concerning the opioid epidemic, devastating and tragic epidemic that has now exceeded HIV/AIDS in the toll it is taking on this nation, and every bit as difficult to come to terms with. And of course, science plays a role and must play a role in overcoming its devastation. Also, in the last year, we, not just I actually, but my colleagues and I had the opportunity to visit many of our members all around the country. In part, that opportunity was made possible by a new grant from the Kavli Foundation that sponsored a number of lectures and visits. But we were out and about in many places all around the country, and it helps so much to keep a finger on the pulse of what our members are facing every day on the front lines. And being a good partner really does involve understanding and listening to the questions, the concerns, the challenges that our members face. We did quite a few webinars as well with our partners, and that's another area where we would so value your suggestions for other topics to cover so that we can bring you via the web the very top expertise in this town and from other locations as well. Experts don't all live in this town, as we know, but to help educate us all and keep us up to speed. A few more just things by the numbers. If you look at just one of these, the 50 op-eds or letters to the editor that we produced over the course of the last year, that's one a week. That's a lot of work. And a little over a third of those saw print, which is an exceptionally high rate of success. These are some of the many media outlets that we were covered in. Again, my colleagues and I and several of our board members are interviewed regularly by Inside the Beltway press and social media of all kinds, and that all around the country. Through the hard work of our membership committee and our staff, we welcomed 35 new members this year. Is there any new member in the room today? I want to thank, wonderful to have you with us. Oh, several. Lovely. And I hope others joining by the live stream. We do welcome you, and we want to hear your ideas. We'd love to visit. There's just so much that we want to partner with you on. We look forward to that. We now have, at least by the end of 2017, 409 members of our alliance. I've made reference to, as have our previous speakers, to some of our priorities this year, and we're already working with you on these, including right now truly crunch time for assuring robust support for science in the appropriations bills that have yet, as you know, have yet to pass for the fiscal year that we're almost halfway through, and then onward to FY19. And then the other important things that we're focusing on this year, as always, the policy environment for both the public and private sector, conducting research. And this is, I'm sure you've noticed, an election year. So we will, as we always do, be highly involved in voter education activities with many partners and just driving toward including the importance of research in every candidate's stump conversation, and ultimately, for those who are elected, their efforts in the Congress when they arrive. Now, Congresswoman Johnson was so great to complement our Advocacy Works theme, if you will, and we did conduct a campaign, started last fall and went into the early part of this winter with our colleagues across the broad science effort. The real point was to stand shoulder to shoulder across science, engineering, and technology, make the case for raising the budget caps and ensuring that this nation really can be prosperous, secure, and healthy by putting research and innovation to work. It was a terrific campaign, and we used the theme of it as the theme of our annual report this year, which was on your seats as you came in. I hope you have a chance to take a look at that. It just came out today, as well as the poll summary booklet that we're so grateful to the American Medical Association for helping us cover the costs of printing this material every year. It always it has a very broad audience, not least among our members. So tonight, we have the opportunity for the 22nd year in a row to honor some extraordinary advocates, leaders of the medical and health research community. I hope most of you, if not all of you in this room, will be with us this evening to honor those who are listed here, including our very own John Edward Porter, our Chair Emeritus, who's being honored with our Legacy Award, which, thanks to Ann Lurie, the most gracious and generous donor, will now be renamed in your honor, John. And we are so proud of that and proud of you. Thank you. It will be a great evening. And it's made possible not only by the stunning work of those advocates, of course, but also by a wonderful group of sponsors who are listed on this slide and the next one as well. So I want to just wrap up by doing a real shout out to my colleagues on the staff of Research America, who are nothing short of extraordinary. Thank you, each and every one. I can see quite a few of you standing over here, wave your hands. Let's have a round of applause for these great people. Well-deserved applause, and lots of hard work every day, but it is a great pleasure. And I thank our board. Many of you are here. You want to raise your hands, wave your hands, fabulous to work with. And we'll be working them even harder, the rest of you should know, because we have a board meeting following this meeting. So at this point, that concludes my remarks. And Mr. Chairman, I think I hand it over to you again. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Don't worry, I'm not the chairman. Mike Castle is. I'm just introducing our afternoon panel, which for me is a tremendous pleasure. So I'm Alan Leshner. I'm a member of the board of directors. I'm what's known as productively unemployed, but I used to be Rush Holt. And many years ago, I was at the National Institute of Mental Health for a number of years, and therefore I feel good and excited about introducing this afternoon's panel, including the moderator, but I feel a little bit badly that as a country we haven't made more progress and that we haven't, in fact, adopted this as near an important issue as it needs to be. Every year, some 60 million Americans experience a mental disorder. Numbers vary. It's hard to get an accurate number, but as many as 1 in 5. And the burden only continues to grow. It's a major crisis from the perspective of the World Health Organization, from every domestic organization, and a lot of it is the need to fill gaps in knowledge. The gaps in knowledge that are depriving us of new molecular targets for developing more effective medications, and the lack of understanding how to do an appropriate job handling mentally ill people in the community. So this afternoon, we have a terrific panel talking about research issues. It's going to be moderated by Joyce Frieden, news editor from MedPage Today. And Ms. Frieden began her career in medical journalism as news editor for Physicians Management, Modern Medicine, Hospital Formulary, and several other medical magazines. She's appeared in Business and Health magazine, Internal Medicine News, Family Practice News, Pediatric News, a bunch of places. She's the recipient of a Jesse Neal Award presented for editorial excellence by American Business Media and co-coordinator of the Washington chapter of the Association of Health Journalists. And let me mention who the panelists are. Dr. Linda Brady, who is the terrific, I might add, director of the Division of Neuroscience and Basic Behavioral Science at the National Institute of Mental Health, where she's responsible for leading the Institute's portfolio of basic neuroscience to support NIMH's mission of transforming the understanding and treatment of mental illnesses. She's worked in a variety of domains, including drug discovery and clinical therapeutics, and she's co-chair of the Neuroscience Steering Committee for the Biomarkers Consortium, which is a public-private partnership of the Foundation for the NIH, the FNIH, that focuses on discovery, development, and qualification of biological markers to support drug development. Dr. Kafui Ziraza is an associate professor at Duke University. Dr. Ziraza is an associate professor with appointments in the departments of psychiatry and behavioral science, neurobiology, biomedical engineering, and neurosurgery. His research focuses on understanding how changes in the brain produce neurological and mental illness. Dr. Ziraza received the Charles Johnson Leadership Award in 2007. He's been awarded the International Mental Health Research Organization Rising Star Award, the Sidney Bear Prize for Schizophrenia Research, and his lab was featured on CBS 60 Minutes in 2011. The third member of the panel is Dr. Wayne Drevitz, who's Vice President and Disease Area Leader in Mood Disorders in the Neuroscience Therapeutic Area at Janssen Research and Development of Johnson & Johnson. Dr. Drevitz joined Janssen in August of 2012 as the first disease area leader in mood disorders. He joined the Washington University Department of Psychiatry faculty, where he conducted imaging studies of mood and anxiety disorders. Dr. Drevitz formerly worked for the National Institute of Mental Health Mood and Anxiety Disorders Program and was chief of the section of neuroimaging. The final panelist is Brandon Staglin, who's the president of One Mind Institute. Mr. Staglin has been a central part of the One Mind Institute in many different capacities since 2005. One Mind has the mission to guide, support, and facilitate promising and collaborative brain research in order to provide better diagnostics and treatments. Mr. Staglin's on a variety of advisory councils for NIMH, for Mind Strong Health, for Stanford University's Prodrome and Early Psychosis Program Network, and is a stability leader in the Stability Network. Mr. Staglin's own experience with recovery from schizophrenia has empowered him to contribute in uniquely positive ways to advancing the well-being of individuals facing serious mental illness. So a fabulous panel. We should have a great discussion this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to it. Joyce, you're on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being with us here and those of us who are online also. I think we're going to start out by having each of our panelists talk for 2 or 3 minutes about their work and the research or advocacy that they may be doing, and then I'm going to ask a few questions and open it up to the audience. So, Linda, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to tell you about several of our directors, Josh Gordon's priorities for the National Institute of Mental Health. So his first is a near-term priority on suicide research, the prevention of suicide. So the suicide rate in both males and females has been increasing over the last 15 years. And the Institute, along with several professional organizations, has partnered to really reduce the rate of suicide by 20% by 2025. So there's been a lot of initiatives that have been rolled out of the NIMH, including screening in the emergency department settings and a lot of other sort of follow-up tools that can help people reduce the rate of suicide and get the help that they need. And there's a lot of nice programs that are ongoing, and we're very hopeful that that will make an impact. The second priority is really studying neural circuit function and understanding how neural circuits are disordered in mental disorders itself. And by having the tools and technologies to understand how circuits work in the normal brain and how they become disordered, this will open up new avenues for looking at treatments and way to modulate circuits with pharmacologic neuromodulation or psychosocial approaches to improve treatment outcome for serious mental disorders. And the third area is focused on computational psychiatry, which is a new area. We've had workshops this past year, and there will be an article that summarizes the findings of that workshop, has just been accepted to molecular psychiatry, so coming out soon. And it's really using experiment-based modeling and simulation to look at phenotypes across mental disorders and to come up with a new way to look at multiple levels of analysis from genes to cells to circuits to really understand and find new ways to intervene and treat mental disorders.
Thanks, Linda. Kaf, go ahead.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Kaf Jarasa. I'm a researcher down at Duke University in the departments of psychiatry, bioengineering, neurosurgery, and psychiatry. I am both an engineer by training, a neuroscientist, and a psychiatrist. And it's an honor to be here this afternoon. As a young scientist, I've benefited from much of the advocacy work that you all do, so thank you. And it's a great honor to be here on the stage with many friends and folks who have supported and funded my research. I think a lot about the brain, and I think about electricity as medicine because my background is in engineering. And so this makes a lot of sense if you understand cardiology, right? You think about the idea of going in the hospital and maybe having someone read an EKG that tells you about how your heart is doing. And maybe in some cases, the best treatment is a pacemaker for your heart, or if your heart isn't pumping, maybe it's defibrillation. So we've thought about the idea of electricity in medicine in the context of cardiology for a long time. It turns out electricity is also medicine in the context of neuropsychiatric illnesses as well. For devastating illnesses like depression, we've known for a long time that some of the best treatments available are what people would call shock therapy or electroconvulsive therapy. Now, these treatments come along with a lot of side effects, which is why it isn't our first choice. But the question is, can we use electricity in a precise way by taking advantage of technology to put electricity in the right place, in the right amount, with the right timing, to ultimately create new types of treatments for diseases like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or depression. And so in my lab, we work on combining engineering. This allows us to try to understand the brain in terms of electrical processing, right? We've got over 200 billion cells in our brain. You'll hear all about them today. About half of them process electricity. So we're trying to understand the language of those cells and how they communicate with each other, both so that we can create diagnostics in the same way you would get an EKG on your heart. Can we create a diagnostic that tells about risk for diseases like depression or bipolar disorder, that can say you are at risk or you are not at risk? And then can we use those diagnostics to create treatments that mitigate risk, right? So if your blood pressure is high, we have agents that can lower your blood pressure. If your cholesterol is high, we have agents that can lower your cholesterol. And then finally, for those who ultimately have the disease, can we create treatments that normalize brain function? And this field is called brain-machine interface. Can we interface computers with neuroscience to ultimately create new treatments, which we will call sort of our really precise, superfine brain pacemakers to help bring people back to normal function? And we think about the need for this in ranges of illnesses from autism to up to Alzheimer's to the exploding illnesses around the opioid crisis. Can we interface technology to improve human health? So thanks again for having me here this afternoon.
Thanks, Kaf. Wayne, go ahead.
So one of the most ominous events that's been going on in industry in the last decade and a half has been that more and more large companies are exiting neuroscience altogether, and especially they're exiting psychiatry. One of the reasons is it's been more challenging to develop new medicines and also for new medicines to compete with generic medicines that are already available. But nevertheless, the unmet needs, if anything, continue to show themselves getting larger, just as Linda mentioned, with the rising suicide rate, despite the availability of many generic medications. At Janssen, we've continued to commit to neuroscience and to psychiatry, and I specifically work on mood disorders. And some of the places that we have found fertile ground for developing new medicines have involved building on studies that have been sponsored by Linda's organization and her specific programs, because there have been some important discoveries that have guided a path for new treatments that work even in patients who don't get are not able to improve on existing treatments. And so one example has been that an old drug, ketamine, an anesthetic drug, when used in small doses would cause a rapid and robust antidepressant effect, even in people who haven't gotten better with the conventional antidepressant drugs. And so this was discovered by an academic researcher at Yale, and then was furthered at research internally at NIMH. But we have been able to build on those discoveries and are developing a medicine that's the most potent enantiomer of ketamine, namely S-ketamine. And then we developed an intranasal formulation so it was easier to use in the clinic. And this is a medicine that we hope to actually launch in 2019 and have reported positive studies in the literature in our phase 2 studies so far. Another example has been the same type of theme that Linda mentioned, the importance of circuits. And so we have capitalized on the findings that Linda and NIH researchers have found in terms of the circuitry of depression. In fact, that's what I used to work on with in my own academic research. And so I have appreciation for what my colleague here is doing at Duke. But it turned out that the causes of mental illness were quite complicated. They rely on what we call polygenic etiologies, where you have lots and lots of genetic variants that each individually cause only a small effect. And they combine all together to produce mental illness when you're combining this in the context of environmental stress and physiological stressors of various types. That's hard to help. That's hard to guide medicines for, but you can look at the final common pathways in the circuits through which these different abnormalities end up mediating symptom complexes in psychiatry, and then you can pick out those symptom complexes that still aren't very well treated by existing medications. And so we have also been able to make progress by using some of the things that Linda talked about, where you have now we now know a lot about brain and behavior through these circuits, where we know specific neurotransmitters that will have effects on these specific circuits, and so we can target specific complexes with those treatments, and are thus able to develop new treatments that meet unmet needs in patients who have mood disorders.
Thanks, Wayne. Brandon.
Yeah, thank you to Research America for inviting me to participate in this panel with such illustrious guests as well. And thanks to all of you for being here to listen to our talks and also to participate in this discussion. So we live in a time of growing challenges, especially in healthcare. And those challenges are both internal and external. Now, in my 28 years of recovery from schizophrenia and advocacy for brain health research, I've learned that to be effective in both those areas has required me to have and to communicate hope. So I've done this with some meaningful results, and I'm going to share with you today a little bit about my experiences that have led me to advocate for specific strategies to help folks with brain health issues recovery, and also the scientific discoveries that have supported those strategies. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the challenges that I see laying ahead and what One Mind and I are doing to hopefully address them. So when I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1990, I thought all my hope was lost. I nearly took my own life from the anxiety and depression that was badgering me at every turn. I was lucky. Luckier than the 40,000 Americans who do take their own life each year. 90% of them experience severe mental illness. Luckier than the 10.4 million Americans who live with severe mental illness every year. Today, I'm very thankful to be alive and well, and thankful to be able to advocate to help others regain balance and meaning in their lives, folks who struggle. So, in 1990, what saved me during my first episode was a comprehensive early intervention. Good medical treatment combined with community involvement helped me get back engaged in life again and back on the road to hope. During my second episode in 1996, an experimental treatment called cognitive training, neuroplasticity-based treatment that helped me remold the pathways in my brain, the neural pathways, the circuits that you've been talking about, to a healthier status, helped me get back into life again, back into hope again. So I've recovered well since then, and I'm very thankful for that. But because of these experiences, I've become a passionate advocate for implementation of these strategies for folks who live with mental illness, both early intervention for psychosis and digital adjunctive treatments. So to build hope for these treatments, I've blogged about my experiences in recovery and also webcasted about the great discoveries that scientists like Cap and others are making to help develop better treatments for brain illness. And when I've shared all this information with people, I've gotten great responses of people telling me that they've been inspired by this knowledge, that the science is going on, and the recovery can be possible for them and their families. So it's been really gratifying to hear that from people and make those connections. So now I've been inspired by that to take my advocacy into action. So in 2017, I helped to write and pass a bill in the California State Legislature to accelerate the spread of early psychosis treatment throughout California. And now what's important to me is to confirm that that's a cost-effective way to treat psychosis. A study sponsored by the NIMH called RAISE has shown it to be effective, but is it cost-effective when implemented on a large scale? So to address that question, One Mind and I are supporting an initiative in California to create a collaborative learning healthcare network amongst the early psychosis treatment centers in California to not only help to answer that question, but also to help the centers learn from each other, sharing data and information so that the rising tide amongst them will lift all their boats. Now, this can help as well develop better treatments and better treatment practices for folks with mental illness. So how can you help? You can help by building hope in yourself and sharing hope with others, as Bernice Johnson so eloquently stated today. If you like, you can sign up for OneMind's email newsletter on onemind.org to learn about the work OneMind is doing. Participate in my Brainwaves webcast that I do each month with a different scientist capstone on it, a different advocate each month. Learn all you can about the amazing science which is changing the face of brain health care, and share this information with everyone you know, including your legislators. Become a regular hope machine. And if you do this, not only will your contributions help raise excitement and support for science, but also help improve the lives of millions of people. So I appreciate your support. Thanks. And I'll take any questions you have through the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. So I want to get started myself with a few questions, but I hope you folks out there are thinking of questions too. Linda, I wanted to ask you in particular about the BRAIN initiative and wondered if you could talk a little more about that.
Hey, so the BRAIN initiative stands for Brain Research Through Accelerating Innovative Neurotechnologies, and it's a large billion-dollar initiative that was launched just a few years ago. And it's co-led by Josh Gordon, the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, and Walter Koroshetz, the director of the National Institute of Neurological Diseases and Stroke. And there's 8 other neuroscience institutes that participate as well. And it's focused on conducting innovative technology and tool development to understand brain and behavior. And it's being guided by a report that was written by a group of scientific experts in the community called the Brain 2025 report. And it's focusing on understanding the unique cell types in the brain, every single one of them, by looking at their RNA and their transcriptional expression. It's trying to understand the microcircuits in the brain, how those circuits work together to deliver broader, like functional MRI imaging approaches that you can look at the brain, and how you can understand behavior. And there have been a number of initiatives that have been rolled out, about $500,000 worth so far, with really incredibly innovative research that many of the individuals in this room are conducting. And the results, we hope, will lead to tools that can be used in humans. And as it moves into the next phases of research, to start understanding and using those tools to look at disease and ways to intervene and times to intervene. So by having both the temporal and the spatial understanding of how cells work within the circuits, we will learn new ways to intervene in complex neuroscience-based disorders.
And so is that right? Are some of you on the panel part of that? Can you talk about
Yeah,
your projects?
So I've benefited tremendously from the BRAIN initiative, and I think the real opportunity there is to bring neuroscience and engineering together into the same framework. And that is happening both at the level of engineering in terms of constructing new tools and devices to get information out of the brain at the speed at which thoughts happen, right? So we've had tools of getting information out of the brain. They typically either happen really slowly, right? So these are things like functional MRI or functional magnetic resonance imaging that looks at changes in blood flow in the brain as a proxy of a brain area becoming active. The problem is that signature that you have is slower than the speed of thoughts. We've got other approaches that can get information from the surface of the brain, but you can't get it from inside, so without the spatial detail. But the BRAIN Initiative is pulling that together with folks who can understand massive amounts of data. So not simply thinking about 1 cell or 2 cells or 10 cells, but how do thousands of data points work together? So this idea of machine learning, right? These things that have been taking advantage of computer science, can we bring that into neuroscience?
So what might that look like in 10 years?
Yeah, so I can tell you what that looks like hopefully before 10 years. So one of the projects that we recently finished up, so we're using engineering technologies to get information, electrical activity out of the brains of genetically identical mice. And what we can do is put these mice through stress, and some of the mice tolerate stress well and some of them don't. And human beings, we think about this as resilience, right? So those experience stress and don't get illness, and susceptibility. And then what we can do is use machine learning to understand the electrical signatures that predict which of the genetically identical mice will tolerate stress well and which ones won't. So that gives us a framework in which we can say both how the brain works, but also how the brain predicts disease. Those are the types of things coming out of the BRAIN Initiative.
Wow. Wayne, anything that you're familiar with or working on?
So we're not participating directly in these kinds of research, but we have been using the same kind of principles and collaborating with people that are benefiting from the BRAIN initiative. Just as an example, we have been trying to use machine learning, in just as Kath described it, to develop algorithms that would help physicians predict which patients are at imminent risk for suicide, and also which ones are at imminent risk for relapse. And so to take patients that are currently stable on their medicines, but or may have not be currently on medicines, but nevertheless have a course of recurrent depression, and being able to predict when are they, how likely are they to relapse within the next 2 to 4 weeks. And so we're making some headway there. And then we're participating with the Veterans Administration to look at very large databases that they have to see if we could predict suicide attempts in patients that have been in the veterans system prior to the time that they would actually have made the attempt. So we're also benefiting from these kind of large informatics-based machine learning activities that have the ability to take real-world types of information and learn on a training set and predict better than what we've been able to do so far as psychiatrists.
Right. Brandon, you had talked about being a beneficiary of medical research, and I know you're working on spreading your message of hope to everyone, and I wondered about how you got from where you were at such a low point to ending up to becoming an advocate and going public, and how that came about.
Sure. I actually wrote a blog post about that about 5-6 years ago or so. Called Why I'm an Advocate. So the story is like this. So when I was first diagnosed, as I mentioned, I was just in a very dark state. I didn't think I could recover. I ultimately have been able to recover through 2 episodes due to the factors that I mentioned. And other factors include the loving support of my family and friends, and initiative to just want to get back into life again, and curiosity about science. So what turned me into an advocate was when I learned more about how big this issue is. So when I was very sick, I thought, oh God, it's just me. I didn't have any picture of there being a broader phenomenon out there of psychiatric illness and how big it was. Having been diagnosed in 1990, people didn't talk about it very much back then, and people still don't talk about it enough. But my family founded One Mind in 1995 as the Stagland Music Festival for Mental Health. That's what it was called back then. And we still do that event. But one of the patrons of the music festival, her son, up in Seattle, an article was written about him in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. And his name was Mark, and he did very poorly with the mental health system. It failed him, basically. He had schizophrenia. He ended up homeless and unable to recover with any treatment that was offered to him. I've just felt so sad for him. And I've encountered many families and individuals since then who've followed similar trajectories. And so that really brought it home for me how big this problem is. So I wanted to do something about it. So when offered the chance in 2005 to design a website for the music festival for now Brain Health, we call it, I jumped at the chance, being in communications at the time. So that was my launch of work for One Mind, and since then, as I mentioned, I've blogged and webcasted about it, and it's snowballed since then.
Wow. Well, speaking of kind of giving hope to people, I'm curious, kind of ask all of you, is there any particular study or research finding you've seen lately that's really energized or excited you or made you think about the future of this field?
Well, I'd like to just pick up on the point that Brandon was just talking about with the RAISE initiative, that is recovery after an initial episode of schizophrenia. And Bob Heinzen, who leads our services and intervention research branch at NIMH, has really been the lead in pushing that forward. And I'd like to also note that the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, SAMHSA, created block grants that allowed the support of states to roll out and adopt the evidence-based treatments that were developed under the RAISE program in terms of both psychosocial pharmacologic treatments and how to help people through the first episode of psychosis. And we currently have a program called EpiNet, which is again trying to implement what Brandon said, sort of linking up the academic research investigators with the community care to give specialized community care, to standardize the assessment and clinical assessments of people in first episode psychosis, and also to share all of that data in the NIMH data archive so that people can learn from what works and doesn't work as the first line strategy to help people with first episode psychosis. So I find that to be a really great end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, our institute is investing in a lot of biomarker work that helps to identify people at risk, at clinical high risk for psychosis. So trying to identify individuals before the first episode of psychosis. And there's a group led by Ty Cannon at Yale University that leads a study called the North American Prodromal Longitudinal Study. And they've been using imaging, electrophysiological approaches, and cognitive-based approaches to really try to understand and predict who's on a path to move towards first episode psychosis and who is not. And there's now an international effort as well, led in the UK by Nikos Koutsouleris at Pronia Study, and a study led also in the UK. And all of these groups are working together to get enough subjects to be able to see and do machine learning algorithms as well on the imaging studies that have been done so far, looking at cortical thickness of the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. And it's really promising that we have now an international integrated effort to try to really make progress in this area.
Wow. And you, Wayne, haven't you talked about that too, the importance of early diagnosis of mental illness?
We have. I think that in some of the conditions, just as Brandon mentioned, the earlier that you end up intervening, and you can preserve more function, and so as Linda was talking about the individuals at chronic high risk for psychosis, we have started to specifically try to figure out how can we develop treatments that would work earlier to prevent illness as opposed to waiting until it becomes chronic. There's evidence from bipolar disorder, for example, that if once you've had a first manic episode, you actually then start to, with every subsequent manic episode, you start to have more and more brain atrophy, and so it's important to intervene and stop. If you can prevent that first manic episode, that would be the goal. But nevertheless, once an illness is started, as Brandon mentioned, intensively treating patients so that they don't continue to have these episodes of psychosis seems to be particularly important.
And Kof, anything to add?
Yeah, so I'm a psychiatrist, but I'm also a family member who's seen the effects of these illnesses firsthand. And one of the things that's frustrated me is that the medicines we have just aren't good enough. And so if we were to have someone who was having depressive symptoms and they came in the clinic and we started them on a medication, about 1/3 of people would get better. And then you might try another medication 6 weeks later after you figure out the first one wasn't working very well, and so on. And in going through clinical training, I was always amazed. I would go, someone would have a bacterial infection, they'd take a sample, send it down the clinic, figure out whether it was gram-positive or gram-negative, figure out what it was resistant to, and go right to the correct medication. Yeah. And so I wonder if there's a future like that in psychiatry. One of the studies I've been most excited about it is taking exactly that approach. This is out of a group out of Cornell. Connor Liston led that study. And what he did was he went and he collected brain imaging scans from all across the US and Canada and had a massive sample of patients where he had brain scans. And then instead of thinking about the brain as a collection of instruments, he thought about the brain as a symphony, so an organ that played music. Wow. And he asked the question how the instruments were playing together. And then when he put all of that information through machine learning, he realized that there were 4 different types of brains that were involved in depression. And he called them depression biotypes. And of each of those different biotypes, he found out that one of them responded really well to one treatment, but not another. So what this means is we may have the possibility down the line through brain scans and machine learning of stratifying patients into the right group and the right treatment. This means now we don't have to deal with this 6 weeks of delay or trying multiple medications. Right. We might be able to get the right patient to the right medication immediately.
Wow, very exciting. All right, so anyone out there have any questions? We will bring the mic to you. Yes, go ahead. Mel.
Thanks so much for outstanding presentations. Lucinda Main with the Colleges of Pharmacy, and I am struck that we have a workforce crisis, whether you're talking about the scientific workforce or the clinical workforce in mental health. And I would appreciate your thoughts on where we are and what strategies we might think about embracing to address the deficiencies.
Anyone? Go ahead, Linda.
Well, so there have been many reports, including the National Academies of Medicine, report on, training the next generation of scientists, and there's been a focus on neuroscientists and MD, physician scientists as well. So the NIH as a whole and our institute that I can talk with specifically has a number of initiatives to help early career development for scientists and physician scientists. And we have also programs that help early stage investigators, to get started in the research path. And we're also looking for ways to help investigators that are at a critical junction where they're up for tenure, they need to be supported. We're trying very hard to diversify the workforce. That turns out to be an extreme challenge, but we reach out at various meetings and we have ways of inviting scientists to meetings, and we try to invite our young career scientists to professional meetings and cook them up and have networks where they can learn from each other and share experiences and how they're doing. It's a very difficult process, but we're all working on it together.
Yeah. Thanks. One Mind is doing something similar. We offer these Rising Star Awards every year to young investigators. Janssen sponsors some of those awards very graciously. Thank you. And as I mentioned, Kaf Jarasa won one of those as well. We've had 23 over 15 years. So these are for young investigators to help them develop their careers as well as to make groundbreaking discoveries to help patients. We bring them together in every year at our music festival for brain health at a scientist meeting beforehand to share ideas with each other and develop their collaborations as well. What I also wanted to mention about the workforce is that one thing we can do is develop ways to make the existing workforce go farther in terms of telemedicine or augmenting their capabilities with digital sensing, with digital real-time monitoring of patient condition. So I'm on the Ethics, Legal, and Social Issues Board of a company called MindStrong Health based in Palo Alto, California. And we are developing a technology to help clinicians understand the condition of their patients when they're not there. So via smartphone, the way you interact with your smartphone can be a very accurate basis for determining your symptoms of your cognitive symptoms, your mood symptoms. It's experimental now, but it's developing very quickly. And so this could be something that could help clinicians treat more patients effectively without having to be with them all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm extremely excited about this idea of technology, and especially the role that technology can play in delivering psychiatric care. So there just aren't enough psychiatrists to deal with the burden of illness in the country, and we have a long way to go between bridging that gap. But I think technology can play a real role in this. I mean, in fact, one of the people that got me involved in psychiatry, the former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, has taken exactly this approach as well. So I will say I'm excited about the idea of technology on that side. With regards to workforce on the scientific side, right, with researchers, right, so our country has realized that this is a problem, right, and this is both a problem in terms of advancing science as well as keeping our country at the forefront in terms of science. As part of the 21st Century Cures Act, part of the bill actually commissioned a study on this through the National Academy of Science called the Next Generation Research Initiative. This will be concluding in the next month, so you should see a very large report about things our country can do to maintain our dominance and support early career researchers.
I was just going to add that one of the things that I gained by being in an industry, I think, was a much more global perspective. And although we certainly have limitations in having enough mental health clinicians and researchers here, it's a much more severe situation in many other parts of the world, and it's been daunting to think about how you can help people in developing countries, especially, gain access to mental health care when they have so few psychiatrists or so few physicians are even paying attention to mental illness, and so it's it's a daunting global problem that is particularly severe in other countries where that occurs. Also, the stigma of mental illness is also much greater, and so you get layer and layer of obstacle to ultimately bringing patients in other countries the kind of care that they would really benefit from.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah. Over here. Mark Resnick, University of Illinois, College of Medicine, and the American Brain Coalition. Wayne, you mentioned that pharma is really giving up on psychiatry. Yet at the same time we see in cancer, which has been very well funded and should be very well funded, we see all these new, these novel therapies with great specificity. Is the problem that we haven't had the money to find the targets, or is the problem that we haven't had the money to find the appropriate biomarkers that can really stratify psychiatric disease in the same way that cancer is becoming stratified? And how do we fix it? And I think everyone might want to comment on this.
Yeah. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head for a couple of the main difficulties. So we've lacked enough knowledge about etiology and pathogenesis to select targets, the best targets, and then we've lacked the established biomarkers to be able to identify patients that would benefit from treatments against those targets. And that's made drug development and discovery more challenging. And so many companies have gone after the easier paths and you referred to oncology, where you know so much more about, you can actually identify the tumor cells and look at specific genetic markers and really focus treatments. We're a long way from that in psychiatry, but I do think that there are some sort of emerging areas of science where we're making some progress there. One of them is around immune markers. There's increasing knowledge that at least in a subtype of people who have psychotic disorders and mood disorders, there are changes in the immune system that seem to be playing a role in the pathophysiology and that seem to show valid targets for treatment. And so there we're starting to actually apply for the first time biomarkers that might guide you to the right patient for the right treatment. And then that may also give you a way to track whether you've improved the patient's health, where you don't have to simply rely on rating scales that we now have to use in our treatment trials.
I will also add, though, that psychiatry's had precision medicine for a long time, right? And we know one of the available treatments for depression is psychotherapy, right? So I think of psychotherapy as the best precision medicine there is. You literally have a treatment that's being tailored for the person in front of you. And certainly we have to get there in the forms of treatment that require medication, so pharmacological agents or brain stimulation. But it does demonstrate that in the case of psychiatric illness, if you can tune the right thing for the right person, you can get a clinical outcome. It's why, for me, I'm really excited about NIH's Precision Medicine Initiative as well. This idea that if we can understand the range of variants across individuals and how to tune and time treatments to them, we can have better health outcomes. So for me, a lot of these initiatives, many of which were funded through the same bill, right? The idea of next generation researchers, this idea of the Brain Initiative, and this idea of precision medicine, that I think they actually come together to help patients from many different angles.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Hal Paz. So, it's often cited that in populations with chronic illness on medical therapy, the adherence rates after about 3 months are somewhere around 50%. And presumably in a mental health population with a severe burden, in some cases, of not only mental illness, but also other social factors that that population has to deal with, I guess, in various settings, adherence becomes even more challenged. And I'm wondering, despite the fact that we've seen continued progress in psychopharmacology and real advances, where do you see the opportunities around addressing adherence on medication therapy for individuals with mental illness?
So, yeah, one way to address that is to take account of the fact that there's growing discontent amongst many mental health consumers with the side effects of medication. It's kind of a theme which I see surfacing on social media many places. And I've heard from friends as well who experienced these conditions, and I experienced it myself. The reason I had a second episode in 1996 was that I was ramping off my medication on my own recognizance. I didn't want to take it. So I see how important it is to stay on it. But a way to address it is to give people treatments that they will use and will stay with. So those are in development. The ones that I'm thinking of include such digital therapies as there's actually a game in development for treating ADHD that can be applied potentially to other conditions as well, which is actually a very fun-looking game. I haven't played it, but I've seen video of people playing it, and they actually have to build in a timer on it, so you can't play it more than an hour a day, because people will if you let them.
Wow.
So that could be a bad side effect if they played it too much. It's called Project Evo. It's being developed by Keeley Interactive. It's headed up by a scientist at UCSF named Adam Ghazali. So if you can make treatments fun and engaging in some way like that, people will likely stick with it.
I think also removing some of these adverse events that the treatments cause is also important, and that has been a path toward being able to bring a new treatment to market and bring value to patients, while also being able to be commercially viable so that you can make ends meet to develop the compound. And so just by way of example, with the treatment of depression, one of the comorbidities that occurs in mood disorders is cardiovascular disease, and another is obesity, and they end up being related. And yet, the antidepressants that we have, many of them do lead to weight gain over time, and many of the antipsychotic drugs lead to weight gain over time. And so we're taking a problem that already exists and making that part of it worse. And so one of the things that we're targeting is new treatments that don't have the mechanisms that will cause that weight gain, and in some cases that actually will have mechanisms that will prevent the weight gain and may hopefully even help you lose the weight that you've gained on previous treatment. So that would be an example of trying to take out some of the hooks that are in these medicines that do interfere with adherence.
Oh, one other thing I'd like to add. So pharmacogenomics and precision medicine is another area that can help that as well. So determining what treatments will work best for which people with the fewest side effects before they start taking it will help people probably stay on it more.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
I have a question which may be irrelevant in this setting, but it's about mentoring networks for individuals, since it's about neuroscience, individuals who are high IQ synesthetes or have autism and are interested in STEM careers. Are there any kind of role model networks for individuals who are very much interested in STEM careers, but have synesthesia or have autism? And I can't help them, so I'm wondering if there's any mentoring networks for those kind of people.
There's a network called the Lived Experience Research Network, which has been founded by a couple of mental health consumers who I know, people with lived experience, Nev Jones and I'm blanking on the other one's name. I met her, but it's called the Lived Experience Research Network, LERN. This is for folks who experience mental health conditions and are now entering into research of their own, doing research on their own. So if you can Google that and look it up, you might learn more.
Okay. All right. One more out there?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Donna Cryer, CEO of the Global Liver Institute. Perhaps building on a point that Dr. Drevitz was making, I wondered if any of you could speak to the opportunities for collaborative research between brain health and gut health.
So I can say that the NIMH has recognized that there's a contribution of the microbiome to understanding and how it interacts with the brain. It's very complicated and it's at very early stages right now, but there have been research initiatives trying to understand how the microbiome affects specific brain circuits and behavioral outcome measures. And I think we're beginning to learn more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sometimes as neuroscientists we get a little brain-centric, right? But I think it's important to think of the brain as an organ that reaches balance with the rest of the body, right? And there are interactions in both directions, and that includes the brain and the gut. So in a lot of ways, we are what we eat, right? Our brain talks to our gut, the direct signals which go down, and our gut sends signals back up. And so I think this is a really exciting area of research that many labs have moved in recently, especially with the support of funding through NIMH. We hope to learn more about how to use that for therapeutic benefit.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up.
On the adherence side, the ability to create these long-acting drugs, we have one that lasts a month, now one 3 months, and we're looking for an every 6-month version that could help with adherence in certain people. The question that I had, maybe for Wayne, was this sort of silent epidemic of insomnia in the country where you read about more and more, so many people having difficulty sleeping. And we know there's a relationship between sleep and mood. People who are depressed often have sleep disorders. Are there neurological evidence or pathways, circuits that might link the two? I know we're actually working on one.
All right, anybody?
There indeed are, and some of the things that we haven't understood is why have there been secular changes in the onset of mood disorders getting earlier and earlier with each successive cohort. That's something we haven't understood, but it parallels very nicely the relationship between changes in sleep in our culture, and interestingly also in obesity. And so one of the things that has been clear is that insomnia ends up leading to depression. So you get initial insomnia changes, reductions in sleep that end up being chronic, and then you develop depression. And it's actually the most consistent predictor of onset of new depression is, in fact, seeing a patient that comes two times in the previous year with a sleep disturbance. We now have some evidence that you can intervene with sleep and actually treat depression and prevent depression from starting, although there's relatively little evidence so far to support that. But some of the things that seem to be playing physiological roles are that sleep plays vital roles in a number of different homeostatic systems like the immune system. And so when you don't sleep with deep sleep, and that's the specific type of sleep that depressed patients end up lacking, you don't, deep sleep has an anti-inflammatory effect, and you actually don't control your immune system well enough if you go with chronic sleep restriction. So that's one of the places that we understand there's a change. The other interesting thing is when you sleep less over time, it actually increases your likelihood of developing obesity. And so there were some longitudinal studies, one that was a famous one, longitudinal studies of nurses where they were able to show by looking at thousands and thousands of nurses over time that you and then they followed them prospectively, that the ideal amount of sleep was 7 to 8 hours, and if you were outside of those ranges, it predisposed you to a number of different illnesses like cardiovascular disease and metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and other types of diseases. Well, depression turns out to be something similar, where it's not good for you to continue to have sleep reduction, whether it's something that you intentionally do or if it's something that you have a pathological sleep disturbance for.
Okay, well, we are approaching that time where we have to start wrapping things up. So I wanted each of you, I thought you could close with kind of your vision or hope for where you see mental health research in the future. And why don't we start with Brandon?
Okay. So my hope is that within 5 years that screening for mental health risk will be commonplace in schools, in doctors' offices, for youth, and others as well. That these people will be able to access more comprehensive evaluations on a regular basis. If they do screen positive at the initial screening, using such technologies as saliva analysis and also clinical interviews, that these people will be able to get evidence-based care on a large scale, and that this form of early care will be widespread and non-stigmatized, so that people will have no reservations about accessing it. There's actually a model being developed. It has been developed in Australia for 6 years. It's being brought to the United States, called Headspace, which is a very kind of youth-friendly health care model that it's like a community center you go to. It's not like a health center, but it's a community center you go to for hanging out, getting treatment for your health complaints as well as mental health. So it's not stigmatizing. So that's one thing that I'm excited to see and hope more of that will continue.
Thanks. Wayne?
Well, my vision has been evolving, but one of the reasons it's been evolving is that the last questioner, Bill Haidt, has been the head of Janssen R&D until this year, and now he's only stepped down to head a World Without Disease initiative. But his view was a world without disease. We want to prevent and cure, and but because of his influence, we've changed our vision. Although Bill doesn't know this now, but until now, but we've changed our vision internally to be placing a cure for mood disorders in the hands of every patient.
Okay. Thanks. Kaf?
Yeah, my hope is to see preventative treatments for mental illness, and that those treatments are as widely accepted and destigmatized as statins are, or ACE inhibitors are, or diet and exercises for preventing obesity.
And Linda?
Sure, and mine really follows on many of the others, but by understanding the developmental trajectory of brain disorders, that we know when and how to intervene, and we're able to characterize the individual subsets in a precision medicine-like way for psychiatry, so that we can give the right treatment to the right person.
All right, and if everyone could join me in thanking our panelists for a great discussion.
This concludes our luncheon, folks. I would also like to thank the panelists. I thought that was an outstanding panel, by the way. There will be a board meeting, which is scheduled for 2, but we'll start it perhaps in 10 minutes or so, 1:45. Since most of the people who are going to be there are already in this room, and we could just move things along a little bit faster that way. So we'll have a 10-minute break now for the board members, and then we'll convene, I think it's the Peacock Room or something. It's up the hall to the left, as I recall. But I want to thank all of you for being here. We hope to see many of you at the dinner tonight. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And again, we thank you for all the work that you have done to help with medical research in this country. Thank you.